Hello YouTube, welcome to episode 47 of the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. And this week I'm going to be looking at 5 common cards, so get out your pauper decks. We're going to be looking at some cheap and easy card combinations. Right, first off, we are going to be looking at Cecil from Opus 10, Zidane from Opus 10, Puck from Opus 11, Yuel from Opus 7, and Ingus from Opus 13. Cool. Right, Cecil. So, Dull. Put Cecil into the break zone. During this turn, if a forward you control is dealt damage, reduce the damage by 2,000 instead. So this is great. I didn't realise how good he was at first until recently, but it's when you put him into the break zone, it's any forward you control, whenever it receives damage in that turn, minus 2,000. So if your opponent is playing something like chip damage, wind, lightning, or fire, or whatever, every time a forward receives damage, minus it by 2k, and it's all your forwards. Just really, really good, I think, for what is a 2 CP backup and just a break ability. I think that's really good. So yeah, comboing him with the likes of Rosa, because when Rosa enters the field, if you control a card named Cecil, draw a card. So it works on the EX as well. You can have Cecil sat there for a while, you just play Rosa and draw a card. Nice and simple. And then the other Rosa. So obviously, if a forward you control is dealt damage, reduce the damage by 1,000 instead. So Rosa combined with Cecil means that you can actually have it so that all your forwards are taking 3,000 less damage, which is, you know, pretty substantial. It means that you can have some smaller forwards blocking some bigger forwards and them not dying. Dark Knight. Now, if you're running something like Cecil, you're probably going to be running it alongside the likes of Minwoo, but either way, you know, you could still combo this with something like Dark Knight, so pay 1 lightning, deal 1,000 damage to all the forwards your opponent controls, and 2,000 damage to Dark Knight, but obviously it would take 2k damage, and then Cecil would reduce that 2k but to 0, so it would take nothing, which is fine. Hecatonchia. So maybe you have a 8k forward and your opponent has an 8k forward and use Hecatonchia. You can use Cecil to make it so that your forward would actually only take 6k damage, whereas their forward would still take the 8k. Magissa. So let's say your opponent plays something big onto the field and they're going to deal 9k to Magissa. They just want that card gone, but they forgot that you have Cecil. You can use Cecil to make it so actually Magissa's not going to take 9, she's going to take 7. Now this obviously is not the sort of card that you want to be running alongside Minwoo, because if she takes 0 damage then you can't use her ability at all, which would be stupid. So using something like Cecil to reduce the damage she would take, and it, you know, the 9k becomes 7k, then you can use her action ability to go set yourself a fire forward of 3 CPLS and play it onto the field. Now, yes, as I mentioned earlier, you're running something like Cecil, probably going to be running Minwoo as well, because you want to reduce that damage and then reduce it to 0. And that is one of the ways that the game works, was changed a few sets back, so that actually Minwoo's effect technically is a stackable ability now. So you actually choose when it resolves. But being able to reduce the damage by 2,000 and then reduce it to 0 is obviously more beneficial, because if, say, you were going to be dealt 9k to a 9k forward, or 9k to a 9k forward, yeah, then obviously it's not below its damage or its power threshold, so it will then take the 9k damage. But if you were to reduce the damage by Cecil, that then becomes 7k, and then Minwoo would take effect. It will then be reduced to 0. You need to be careful of the likes of Kuchaspal, because obviously that can stop damage being reduced, but still making sure that you order these things correctly makes a difference. Something like Lava Spider, however, if you combine that with a smaller forward, so let's go something say like Gawain, which is only a 5k forward, you can attack with Gawain. He then becomes an 8k attacking forward. Now with Lava Spider, you have to bear in mind that it's attacking forwards you control gain 3,000 power. So once damage calculation has been, well, calculated, his power will go back down to 5k. So if he blocks, or if he attacks, he becomes an 8k. He then gets blocked by a 5k forward. Obviously that forward would then die, but after damage calculation, his power will then go back down to being 5k. He's taking 5k damage, he'll pop and die. So using something like Cecil and Minwoo, or you don't even have to worry about using Cecil in that example, but say Gawain is blocked by a 8k forward, Cecil would matter then, because Cecil would reduce the damage he takes to 6k, and then Minwoo would see that and say, actually you've taken nothing, and then after they finish attacking, Lava Spider would stop taking effect, Gawain would then go back to being a 5k forward, and it's just a good way to be able to make sure that your forwards are actually taking less damage, even though technically they're smaller, but using something like Lava Spider combined with this kind of setup means that your small forwards can actually be quite offensive. Zidane. So if Zidane is dealt damage by a summon or ability, the damage becomes 0 instead. So again, similar ability to what we were talking about previously, but also Zidane cannot be blocked by a forward of cost 4 or more, and he's a 3 CP wind forward with only 5k power. So he has some kind of evasion there where he can get under some of the bigger forwards, and he's a little harder to kill, but ultimately, if he can be blocked, chances are he's going to die. So using something like Leviathan, doesn't have to be Leviathan, Legend Porum, or Green Mage to basically make it so that if Kuchaspel's going to be used, you can cancel that from being used. And obviously Kuchaspel stops any damage from being reduced, so maybe they're planning to combo that into, I don't know, Brynhilde or Phoenix or something to be able to kill Zidane. You can just stop that from happening because otherwise Zidane's going to kick the bucket, and Zidane may be dealing you them quite a bit of damage, being able to sweep under all their big forwards. IMO, so let's again say that your opponent plays something onto the field and it's going to deal, I don't know, 9k to a forward your opponent, or let's say they play 5 CP Cloud and he's going to come in and he's going to deal 8k to a forward you control. You can use IMO to actually redirect that damage from that forward onto Zidane. Zidane takes, or any damage Zidane takes from abilities or summons is reduced to 0, so actually using IMO to completely negate that damage. Again, be careful of something like Kuchaspel, but still it means that you can make one forward survive, and they've played a lot of CP for ultimately something that's done nothing. Filia. So when Filia enters the field, deal 10k damage to all the forwards. Filia deals you a point of damage. So you play Filia, Zidane can't take damage, so Zidane will actually survive. And all your opponent's forwards will hopefully kick the bucket as well. But it's also nice because Filia has a similar ability to Zidane, where if it receives damage from an ability, the damage becomes 0 instead. So they both have a similar form of protection. And then you've got a similar sort of thing with Shantoto. If you deal damage to Shantoto, or if Shantoto has had damage dealt to her, then the damage gets flickered around the board, your side as well. But if your forwards cannot receive damage, then that means that your forwards will survive, whilst your opponent's forwards are dying and being removed via Shantoto. Now, obviously, combining these with the likes of Kayn and Y'shtola is fantastic, because Y'shtola, just like Zidane, doesn't receive damage from abilities or summons, and then Kayn if Kayn is dealt damage other than battle damage, the damage becomes 0 instead, so Kayn can only be killed via damage in combat. And these three work excellently alongside the likes of Shantoto or Filia. And then you've got Shadow Lord, so this is referring more to Zidane's ability to swoop under bigger forwards, so maybe there's a few 2 CP forwards on the field that are blocking Zidane, and with the advent of multicolour forwards, it means that you can be paying only a small amount of CP value for something really big, or not even necessarily multi-element. There's also the Earth Shadow Lord, who is a 9k forward, and that's pretty big for 2 CP, and it will easily block Zidane. So playing something like this Shadow Lord to be able to break all those 2 CP forwards is pretty decent. Just be wary, because Shadow Lord will break your own 2 CP forwards as well. Snow and Hope. So you attack with Zidane, you get to dull out the forward that would be able to block Zidane, but with Hope on the field, it also means that that forward will become dull, which is excellent, because if you have a forward that can only be blocked by certain forwards in your opponent's deck, but you start freezing them out, your opponent isn't able to replay those forwards onto the field because they're already there, and they probably only have a limited amount of forwards, so will actually be able to block something like Zidane. And obviously Zidane is quite hard to kill due to the fact that any damage he receives through summons and abilities becomes 0. So unless they have an outright break or forwards to be able to block Zidane, and even then you're able to dull and freeze them out of the way using both Snow and Hope, your opponent will start to struggle to really deal with something like Zidane, where he can swoop under the big forwards and freeze out anything else. Okay, Puck, I've had so much fun with this card recently. I've got a deck with a few of the cards I'm going to show you soon, and there's just so much cool stuff you can do with this card. I'm going to try him in a few different decks, actually. But anyway, he has a 4 CP Lightning backup, and he's a drop Prince as well, which might actually be quite useful. But when Puck enters the field, choose one forward of cost 1 in your break zone. Play it onto the field. Damage 3, when Puck enters the field, choose one forward of cost 2 in your break zone. Play it onto the field. So good thing is when you play them onto the field, you can actually choose which order they stack in, so you can have the 2 CP forward coming in first, followed by the 1 CP one, if that's the way you want to do it. But also he can play forwards of any element as well, so he's not limited to only lightning. So, but something like Bartz, for example. So the forwards of 1 or cost 1 you control gain haste. So you can have Bartz already in the field, you play Puck, and maybe you retrieve something like, I don't know, Boko or Black Chocobo onto the field through Puck, and then all of a sudden Bartz has given them haste. Boko gives Bartz haste, so then you can start party attacking, then getting a 1 CP forward out of your deck onto the field. That will then gain haste as well, and not to mention the fact that Puck could actually have got a 2 CP forward onto the field as well. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Black Chocobo as well is a great card because it will gain haste off Bartz, and you know, Bartz will have had to have been on the field a turn to be able to attack, but these two party attacking, it's an unblockable party, and then you can search yourself another 1 CP forward. And Jake, obviously all the 1 CP forwards that are being brought in through the likes of Bartz or Puck are pretty small, but if they are something like Jake, or sorry, if you've got something like Jake on the field, then they will be gaining 4K onto the field, so then they become actually 7k forwards, which with haste it means that you don't have to rely on party attacking so much, so then you can just attack with these small little forwards, and your opponent's actually going to start to or struggle to start blocking these because you've got a lot of small, easy to play forwards that have gained haste and are plus 4k power, and again, playing something like Puck to then bring all these little things onto the field is excellent. And it doesn't have to be just something like Wind with Bartz as well. You can actually get something like Kate Sith, and getting Kate Sith onto the field, dulling something out of the way, and then also getting haste off of Bartz is excellent, because whilst Kate Sith is he's a decent card, he's an EX burst, you get to dull something, but dulling and then be able to attack with him as well, that's really good. And you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't miss something like Mid Previa. Obviously Mid, when he comes onto the field, you can get a lightning forward of 1 CP from your breaks and play that onto the field. Obviously he's a bit more restricted because it is only lightning forwards of 1 CP, but still really, really good. So something like Kate Sith or Sid Previa. And that's the key here really, is that all these cards synergize so well together. So Puck being able to get all these 1 CP forwards out of your break zone and playing them onto the field, similar with Mid Previa, obviously he's again restricted, but then them gaining haste off of the likes of Bartz as well is really good. But let's focus more on what Puck can do just by himself, shall we? So he can bring in something like Soul and Warrior of Light. So if you control another job Warrior of Light, Soul actually gains haste, so maybe your opponent doesn't have any forwards to block with, you can play Puck to bring in these two, Soul can then gain haste and attack. If you have 2 more forwards before you play these 2 onto the field, Warrior of Light will actually gain haste as well, and all your forwards will be plus 2k as well. Then you got the likes of Vivi and Zidane. So obviously Puck's a 9 character, Vivi's a 9 character, and Zidane's a 9 character. So you could already have 1 9 character onto the field before you play Puck. Puck then brings in Vivi and Zidane. That is 4 9 characters, at which point Vivi will deal 7k to a forward your opponent controls. But it's actually not out of the realms of possibility for you to have, I think it's 7 9 characters on the field at the same time in Lightning. It's not the easiest, but you do have the likes of King of Bermesia, Freya, there's some Black Waltzers, Puck, and then in 5 you've got a few as well, Amaranth, Lanny, obviously Zidane as well. So it's definitely plausible to be able to get to 7 characters. Not super easy, but definitely plausible. And being able to use Puck to bring in both these guys, Vivi can then nuke something, hopefully get that out of the way so that Zidane can then attack through, deal opponent damage, and then kill something else as well. Okay, Suzuhisa and Noel. Now this is more just talking about the fact that you can play for absolutely any forward, and Suzuhisa actually I think is pretty decent in this case, because being able to play Puck for 4 CP and then bring in something like Suzuhisa, and when a auto ability triggers on your opponent's turn, you then get to get 2 cards to your hand. Obviously you put Suzy into the break zone, but I still think that's pretty decent because that means Puck has effectively completely recurred his cost, and if Puck is actually playing 2 forwards as well, or a forward as well as Suzuhisa, that again is pretty decent. And playing something like Null means that you can dull 2 of your opponent's forwards out of the way, so you can attack through if you wanted, or you could, if you really wanted to, bring Null onto the field to give Suzuhisa haste, and then Suzuhisa haste and, you know, hopefully deal opponent damage, and then ultimately get 2 cards off Suzuhisa when there is a auto ability on your opponent's side. And then you've got something like Kane, who is stupidly strong. So obviously, if you play Kane from your hand, he gains a brainwashing counter, which sucks because he goes onto your opponent's field when he dies, if he has that counter. But there's just so many easy ways to be able to recur 2 CP forwards onto the field in this game anyway, through the likes of Puck or whatever. It's really not that much of a downside. So yeah, Kane is a 2 CP haste forward with 9k power, and just, yeah, put Kane into the break zone to pay for Puck to then bring him onto the field, and voila, you've got a 9k haste attacker. That's just really, really good. Alright, Yeul. So she is a 2 CP ice backup. And ice doll, put a Yuel into the break zone, search for one forward and put it under the top card of your deck. There's a kind of a weird card because you get to search for any forward you want, and that can be, you know, literally any forward. So it could be something like Filia or Wind, Earth, Ishtola, you know, anything. But you get that card out of your deck, you then shuffle your deck, and then you take the top card and put this forward underneath it. It's just a bit strange, but still really good because there are the likes of Geomancer, where you can just look at that top card and be like, I don't want it. Put it under your deck, and now you know that that top card is actually a forward that you put there. And now if you were to use the likes of Ultimecia, you can actually reveal that top card and be like, oh yeah, it's that forward I put there. I think I'll play that onto the field. And obviously Yuel breaks herself when you use her ability, so that does make room for you to be able to play Ultimecia onto the field. Now you need to be careful because of the fact that Ultimecia will also reveal from your opponent's deck as well, so it may actually be more beneficial to them. But if you're using Yuel to put something like Filia on your deck, and then Geomancer to put the top card under, and then you play Ultimecia, which is ultimately a 7 CP investment, which is a lot, I appreciate. But still, to get something like Filia to then board wipe, that's pretty good. To be able to find the card you need to fix your situation and then use Ultimecia to be able to play it onto the field is sometimes you just gotta do it. And it doesn't have to just be something like board wiping as well. It could be cards that get you more cards to hand, or, you know, reactivate your board, something like Yasmat to reactivate things or break a big forward. Ultimately, it's a great way to be able to play an out of color forward that is huge and will super help your field. Leatherford. Now, playing Leatherford in a deck which isn't mono wind is kind of strange, but again, that's why you use something like Yuel to kind of hedge your bets. Use Yuel to put a big old wind forward, now obviously it has to be 5 CP or less, but a big wind forward nonetheless under the top card of your deck. You then play something like Leatherford, and then you know that forward is there, and that brings it onto the field. But the great thing about Leatherford is the fact that it is bringing it onto the field as well. It isn't just coming to your hand. Leatherford does have a fairly high cost of 7 CP, but he also has a break ability which can be beneficial as well. Fusoya. So when Fusoya enters a field, you can reveal the top 2 cards of your deck. You deal their combined CP value in damage, and then you get those 2 cards to hand. That's really good. Again, you are paying 2 CP for Yuel, which means that is effectively increasing Fusoya's cost by 2 CP, but getting 2 cards to hand is good, and you know what one of those cards is going to be. So you can use Yuel to put a big forward there to then increase the damage that Fusoya is going to deal, and, you know, hopefully you can break something with Fusoya, but then also getting that card to hand, and then hopefully be able to play it or do something else to then, again, benefit your field. Vicious. So this is more just describing the fact that you can use Yuel at the end of your opponent's turn to just get that S fodder that you need, or just find that forward that you need to be able to play it on the field. Because, you know, ultimately maybe you've come to a stalemate, you can't do anything, your opponent can't do anything. Use Yuel, put that forward under the top card of your deck, and then you know on your turn you're going to be able to get that card and use that S ability, or just play that forward to get things moving again. Lock. So this is where, again, a bit more luck comes into play, similar to Ultimecia. But obviously you play Lock onto the field, you reveal cards from your deck, or you name a type of card, and then once that card, or that card type has been revealed, you add that to your hand. So you use you put a forward under the top card of your deck, and then you say forward when you play Lock. Now there is the chance that your top card actually could be a forward, at which point that would be, oh, that sucks. But again, you can use something like Geomancer to put that top card under, and you know that playing Lock will actually get you that card. It's an expensive way to be able to get that card, I guess. If you could use Geomancer to put that top card there, but then you could also use Water to be able to destroy yourself a card. But ultimately, if you don't have that and you are just going to be a mono ice, you can use Lock to then get that card to hand, hopefully provided that top card isn't another forward. Similarly, you've got something like Agrias, so when Agrias enters the field, turn over 1 card at a time from the top of your deck until a character plus 3 or less is revealed. Play it onto the field, then shuffle the cards in your deck. So again, you can use Yuel to put a card under the top of the card, you play Agrias, and then you reveal the top 2 cards. You know that one of those top 2 is going to be a 3 CP. Now, hopefully you don't, that first card you reveal isn't a forward or a character of 3 CP or less, so it'd be super annoying if you broke Yuel, put that forward there, and then you play Agrias, and then she reveals a Yuel again. That would just be really a kick in the teeth. But hopefully you actually get to play, I don't know, the Wind, Earth, Ishtola, or something like that, you know, being able to use Yuel to get yourself an off-color but super powerful forward, put it under the deck, use Agrias, and play it onto the field. You've just gained 2 forwards, 4 is 8 CP, and they're both pretty strong. Alright, finally we've got Ingus. So it's a 2 CP Earth backup with Dull. Choose one job standard unit forward or job Warrior of Light forward you control. Until the end of the turn, it gains plus 1000 power and Brave. You can only use this ability during your main phase, so you have to be wary of when you use it. There's no combat tricks in there and you can't use it on your opponent's turn, but you can still set up for combat nonetheless. Raffia. When Raffia enters the field, you may search for one card named Arc, Ingus, or Luneth of cost 4 or less and play it onto the field. So obviously Raffia is probably more geared towards playing, or most people play it with playing the forwards onto the field, but still, being able to play Raffia to then get a backup onto the field immediately is actually very good, and it's great for consistency, and that's something that Warriors of Light have gained over the past couple of sets, is just great consistency. Soul. So when Soul forms a party attacks, you may search for one job Warrior of Light of cost 2 or more and add to your hand. So obviously Soul can party attack and search you something like Ingus, and then obviously whilst it doesn't play it onto the field, it's still again more consistency. You get that backup, you can then play it down and keep on building your field. Wall. When Wall enters the field, you can reveal the top 5 cards. If a Warrior of Light is among them, add it to your hand. Again, that includes backups. But not only that, when Wall is put from the field into the break zone, choose one job Warrior of Light that costs 3 or less in your break zone, play it onto the field. So you may not have had a chance to play Ingus onto the field because you had to discard him for something else, but then when Wall breaks, actually, he gets to come onto the field that way anyway. So again, super consistent. When Aegis enters the field, you may play one job Warrior of Light of 4 or less from your hand onto the field, similar to Raffia, but this time Aegis can play both backups and forwards, but they aren't restricted in their name as much. Raffia does search from deck and play onto the field, whereas Aegis plays from hand, but again, if you're on a Warrior of Light deck, he's going to be able to play something whenever you play him anyway. Lena! So this is more about kind of combat trick stuff now. So you use Ingus in your main phase, remember, to give Lena plus 1000 and Brave, so she actually becomes a 9k Brave forward. I mean, she's 8k as 3 CP already, so she's already above curve, but making her 9k is, you know, problematic for your opponent. Making her 9k Brave, and you attack with her, and then on the stack, you dull her, remove X-Rise counters, choose a forward in your break zone, play onto the field, so fun combat tricks to be had there. And your opponent still has the attack to deal with from Lena. Then you've got something like Monk. So this is referring to Ingus. Obviously, he can target standard units as well. So you could use Ingus to choose Monk. He becomes Brave and 8k. You attack with him. Maybe your opponent blocks with a 9k. You can then dull Monk as well. He then becomes a 9k himself, and then will ultimately break the blocked forward. Yes. And again, no, blocking forward. Sorry. I know how to do words. But you know, you can also use that with other monks as well, so they attack, you can dull this one to then buff your other monk as well. Yes, so Moogle 12, I love this card because when Moogle 12 attacks or blocks, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put them at the top or the bottom of your deck in any order. So you can just look at the top 3 cards and be like, these are all trash, I'm putting them to the bottom. But using Ingus to give him plus 1000 power and Brave gives him a bit more survivability, so maybe he attacks and your opponent's only got a 7k forward and they're like, actually, I don't want my forward to die, so I'm going to take that damage. And then on your opponent's phase, or your opponent's turn, sorry, when they attack, again, Moogle can block, and again, look at the top 3 cards and be like, oh, actually, there's a nice EX in there, I'm going to put those 2 at the bottom, put the EX on top, and then on the next attack, you can then take that as damage, or you can just draw it to your hand on the following turn. Templar! So, dull and choose one forward during this turn. The next damage dealt to it is reduced by 2000 instead. So, being able to use Ingus to make him a 9k Brave is pretty strong already. But then you can attack with Templar. He gets blocked by 9k. You can then dull Templar to make it so that he will receive reduced damage, and he will still break that 9k forward. Obviously, you can use Templar on other forwards as well if you want, but just as Templar as an attacker, you can obviously do that. And finally, Onion Knight. I think this is hilarious because obviously you've got Ingus there, but then you've got Ingus there. They are the same character, and obviously they're both from the DS version, because in the original Final Fantasy 3, Raffia, Ingus, Luneth, and Arc weren't characters at all. They were just called Onion Knight, or they were just, I can't remember what they were called, but this, the Children or something like that, Warriors of Light. But in the remake they gave them names, but obviously the card on the right doesn't have a name technically, it's just Onion Knight 3. But either way, this is hilarious because you've got Ingus, Raffia, Arc, and Luneth as the backups, each of them a different element, which synergizes perfectly with these Onion Knights, almost like they planned it that way. And then all those cards can also give the Onion Knights some fantastic abilities, of just, you know, reactivate them, or give them plus 1000 Brave, whatever. And you can have loads of those Onion Knights on the field as well, and they all gain plus 6000 power, which is pretty bonkers and fun. And there we go, folks. We are done for another episode of the Card Combo Show. Focusing on common cards was more challenging than I expected. Obviously, you just combo legend cards and, you know, they're good then. But focusing more on commons can sometimes be awkward, because you look at a lot of the common cards and so rarely are any of the effects actually anything to write home about. I mean, something like Cecil, that's why I went for him, is actually pretty decent. He's really, really good, and he's only a 2 CP backup, and he has this pretty incredible effect. But what's also funny is when you go through some of these cards and you look at some of the older cards, some of the older commons, and you're like, oh, these cards aren't that great, you actually come to realize how good some of the cards are becoming. Now, with Opus 14 on the horizon, there are some fantastic cards coming out, and I mean some really, really good ones. But with it is some incredible power creep. We've kind of seen power creep coming now for a little while, but Opus 14 really seems like there's going to be a lot of it. But on the flip side, a friend of mine had a deck the other day, and one of the backups he was running was Yarg Roche, and I was like, what are you running Yarg Roche for? That's not that great. And then I thought about it and thought, actually, against something like maybe an ice deck, which is, you know, there might be lots of cards which just choose a character, dull it and freeze it. Okay, fair enough. But actually, if Yarg Roche can be chosen, he must be chosen. So whilst your opponent's deck may revolve around being able to completely freeze out your board by target, 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 if they always have to target Yarg Roche, then they can only ever target him, which then becomes very problematic for them. Obviously, it doesn't work so great against the likes of fire, or maybe wind, but, you know, being able to have it so that he reactivates, or, you know, whatever, off of your opponent's abilities as well, is pretty funny. And it's going back through some of these older cards and looking at some of the jankier abilities, you come to realize that actually maybe they're not so bad now, and cards that haven't been played for like 10 sets may come into their own now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe, and stay lucky.